The book starts off by asking the question, is it even possible to imagine America without the road trip?
But I think the interior quality of a road trip, that one has to really be with themselves, is what deepens the experience and gives you a sense of your identity.
Hello there. In 2014, Aperture released a book called The Open Road, Photography and the American Road Trip. It was the first book to explore the photographic road trip as a genre. The author David Campany chose Frank's The Americans as his starting point. Obviously, photographers like Ansel Adams, Walker Evans and Edward Weston had traveled and photographed throughout America before this time. But at the stage that Frank was embarking on his epic journey, the country had transformed sufficiently to make the road trip more accessible to the middle class. The availability of cars, the growth of the Interstate Highway System, as well as the establishment of an almost unbroken line of fast food joints, motels and gas stations. The road trip is a persistent symbol in the American culture, and it symbolizes possibility, discovery, and also escape. A place to get lost and find yourself in the process. The book opens with a wide-ranging introduction which traces the rise of road trip culture in America and looks at a broad spectrum of photographers who explored the country with their camera from the early 1900s to the present day. Then instead of just doing a kind of best-of style expose, Campany chose to feature 18 photographers who he thinks made the greatest impact on the genre.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the truth.
The phrase, "the open road," comes from a 19th century poem by Walt Whitman named Song of the Open Road.
Afoot and light-hearted I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me, the long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. Henceforth I ask not for good fortune, I myself am good fortune. Henceforth I whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing, strong and content, I travel the open road.
It is a call to adventure and opportunity, and it was written at a time when the West was beginning to open up. The concept of the road trip has shifted over time, but it has always incorporated a combination of an outward voyage as well as a journey of inward exploration of the self. Jack Kerouac wrote the novel On the Road in 1957. And 2 years later, he wrote the introduction for the US edition of The Americans by Robert Frank. Frank, a Swiss immigrant, tore through the myths surrounding the American dream, but he also set up a framework for future photographers to extend the genre of the road trip. He broke the mold of the Life magazine picture story, saying the following: because Frank's work was so powerful, it's also been suggested that perhaps not only did he start the genre, but he also made it very difficult for anyone else to follow in his footsteps. To a degree, every photographer included in this publication has worked within the long shadow that's been cast by the Americans. They have had to explore different ways of avoiding repetition and of adding something to the genre.
So in 1964, I bought an old Volkswagen bread truck and converted it into a camper of sorts and went off on an incredible trip around America for 2 months. I guess you could say I was chasing Robert Frank.
Frank himself was strongly influenced by Walker Evans and his book American Photographs. From our perspective, one might think that this shot by Evans was taken in a depressed neighborhood, but actually these homes were owned by fairly well-off people, and the billboards were erected to shield the residents from the traffic noises. The road had initially been built for quieter horse and carriage traffic. There are a number of themes that emerge as one pages through this book. One of them is the emphasis on the automobile itself.
For me, the car is such, it's like, it's so analogous to the camera in some ways, like this glass, the world out there, the glass, and then you on this side.
Early on, open-top cars dominate. That's Walker Evans's Studebaker with Robert Frank in the driver's seat. He would sometimes drive with Evans on his photo trips. In this shot by Inge Morath, it's a 57 Chevy. Then later on in the book, during the 70s, Stephen Shaw and William Eggleston chose to use Fords. Stephen Shaw actually had to learn to drive in order to start his cross-country trips. From Sternfeld onwards, the van becomes king. This is Sternfeld's van in the foreground. Here, Ryan McGinley photographs city kids fearfully backing away from a horse. In some of the essays, the photographers are using the spaces that they are photographing to reflect the external that they have discovered, while others are more self-reflective. Some, like Gary Winogrand, capture the idea of movement and the immediacy of American life. Others have chosen to use large format cameras, which slows the pace and allows viewers to enter a more contemplative place. Serendipity is a strong component of the photographic road trip experience. At every stage, one needs to make choices that may or may not lead to a situation that offers a remarkable shot. In order to keep moving and looking, one needs to have faith that eventually something meaningful will emerge out of the landscape.
It's this relaxing into accidents and kind of knowing and trusting that it's going to come. Sometimes it doesn't come for days, and then you're like, oh, it gets scary.
I really feel like accident is the lifeblood of photography. And I think when I was a younger photographer, I was much more controlling about how I was going to make a photograph, because it takes a certain amount of faith to allow for accidents to happen.
The idea of an outsider comes through strongly, from Kerouac and Frank to Justine Kurland.
Yeah, I kind of feel like an outsider. I was a nerd in high school. People threw snowballs at me when I was walking home from school.
These photographers are confronted by the constant battle between needing to connect with others and needing to be alone.
So I leave the family, and then I return to the family. And this again seems central to me to what photography is about, at least for me, is this, it's like being in it, but being away from it, over and over and over again.
From interacting with many photographers who are drawn to explore the unknown, as well as the edges of society, I've built up a belief that in order to maintain this drive of seeking and capturing, photographers are propelled by a desire to find some form of resolution. Many of the photographers that I've spoken to have had some form of psychic break within their lives that has interrupted their sense of continuity and certainty. I'll have a look at a few of the 18 essays now. In 1963, Ed Ruscha self-published 26 gasoline stations, in which he recorded in a formally rigorous manner the gas stations that he passed on his regular trips from LA to Oklahoma City. Like Frank, he wanted to avoid traces of romanticism, so his 26 gas stations are presented in a very deadpan manner. Inge Morath is the first photographer in this book to move from monochrome to color for her series The Road to Reno. During this time, she kept a written diary of her thoughts about the country. Looking at the photographs, one wouldn't think that she was disapproving, but she was very keen to get home to Austria as soon as possible. Other essays concentrate on William Eggleston's color experiments and Stephen Shaw's more conceptual views. He had both literal and symbolic elements to his work. Joel Sternfeldt's photographs for American Prospects are very formal and classically composed. He made this work at the same time that David Lynch made the film Blue Velvet. There are a lot of similarities. Outwardly, the images show an orderly America, but under the surface there's something dark and troubling brewing. Even though the images have a surreal quality to them, you can sense his deep affection for the country. Campany's choices won't please everyone. He included Ryan McGinley and Justine Kurland, but leaves out the Vanessa Winship series She Dances on Jackson. He also ends with a Swiss duo, Teo Honorato and Nick Krebs, and their series The Great Unreal. They've taken the cliches of the road trip and turned them on their heads. They even traveled with a toy road which they could set up in a landscape that didn't have the real thing. Here they've embedded French fries in the foreground with a view of the Grand Canyon behind. It's easy to see how young photographers could feel overwhelmed by what has gone before them. Photographers like Vanessa Winship, Alex Soth, and Justine Kurland, who took up the challenge of the open road, have the accumulated baggage of a really well-established history of American road trip photography. They have to find other ways of engaging with this landscape. Alex Soth's Sleeping in the Mississippi is featured in the book, and the work has nods to Walker Evans, Stephen Shaw, and Joel Sternfeldt. But he still manages to reveal something that is new and also personal. Doug Rickard embarked on a road trip using Google Street View, so he didn't actually have to leave home to produce this essay. The book ends with interesting maps showing the routes that each photographer took. Thanks very much for watching, and please join me next time. Cheers.
What's so amazing about it is that it contains some of the best photography ever made in the history of the medium, all collected together, and explores this dream of the road trip and all that contains.
The open road will never, ever, ever lose its excitement. I believe that part of the way all of this works, and why the open road and finding the other, so to speak, is so appealing, is because I think that we often have a difficult time seeing the things that we're most familiar with and that we're around every day.
So I would say that the road trips have always taught me something about myself, something about the medium, and something about the culture that we live in.